Las Vegas, 1972. The lights were blinding, the crowd deafening, yet Elvis froze. He leaned toward the first rows, searching. He had promised someone he would not leave until he found her a widow, who'd been waiting all night. If you believe small acts of kindness can stop the world, stay with me through this story. And if Elvis's compassion moves you, share this video with someone who still believes in legends. The orchestra struck its first note, brass and strings swelling across the Las Vegas showroom. But before the band could fall into rhythm, Elvis lifted his hand. The music stopped cold. An arena that moments before rattled with screams and applause fell eerily quiet. All eyes turned to him. He stood still in the glow of the spotlights. His white jumpsuit shimmered under the heat, rhinestones reflecting like tiny stars. The microphone trembled slightly in its stand, picking up the faint hiss of the amps. Even the ushers froze, their flashlights half raised, waiting. Then he said it. "I can't keep singing. Not until I find her." A murmur rolled through the audience, spreading like a wave through the 2,000-seat theater. Some thought it was part of the act. Others leaned forward, whispering. Elvis's gaze swept across the rows, eyes narrowing as if he could search through the smoke. Through the shadows, "She's here tonight," he added, voice low but firm. A widow gasps. A woman near the front covered her mouth. Another clutched her program tighter. The smell of cigarette smoke and spilled cocktails seemed to thicken in the silence. Nobody moved, waiting for what he meant. Elvis's hand brushed the scarf draped around his neck. A nervous gesture more than showmanship. He shifted on his feet, sweat glistening under the heavy lights. Witnesses later said he seemed restless, as if the stage couldn't contain him until he made good on his promise. Some reports claim he had received a letter that afternoon, a widow writing about her late husband, who had adored Elvis since the days of two. Others believe a fan tipped him off just before the show, pressing a folded note into a stagehand's palm. No matter the origin, one thing was certain: Elvis believed she was here, and he wasn't about to let her vanish into the sea of faces. "Don't start the next song," he told the band. His voice was steady, but his jaw clenched tight. The guitarist lowered his pick. The drummer exhaled and leaned back. Around the room, ushers began moving, shining flashlights along the aisles. Beams of light darted from face to face, frozen smiles, raised eyebrows, hopeful hands. Elvis kept scanning, his eyes sharp and restless. For those in the audience, time stretched. Seconds felt like minutes. The only sound was the soft rustle of programs, the occasional cough, the low hum of stage lights. Everyone waited for a cue for someone to stand. To reveal herself. Elvis never stopped a show like this. One witness later recalled. He didn't miss a note, but that night he missed nothing. He leaned toward the edge of the stage, bending low, almost stepping down. His voice dropped to a near whisper, but the room was so still that everyone heard it. "I promised I wouldn't leave until I found her." The tension tightened like a rope. Where was she? Was she afraid to stand? Was she even here at all? In the crowd, heads turned and whispers darted. Women in dark dresses hesitated, unsure if they should raise their hands. Men nudged their companions. A young boy tugged at his mother's sleeve, asking what Elvis meant. Still, no widow stepped forward. Elvis straightened, his scarf slipping slightly as he looked out once more. His jaw set harder. His voice grew firmer. "She's here. I'll wait." The spotlight traced his silhouette as he stood alone on the stage, unshaken. The suspense pressed down on every person in the room. Ushers kept searching. The crowd leaned forward, restless, hushed, and then movement. A small flicker in the third row. A hand half raised. A woman dressed in black, trembling, uncertain if she was the one he sought. The crowd shifted toward her, whispers turning into a low wave of sound. But was it her? Elvis leaned in, eyes narrowing, ready to find out. Rows of faces turned toward the aisles as security moved in. The air inside the showroom shifted. What had been anticipation for another hit song was now a restless search. Ushers raised their flashlights higher, beams cutting through the smoke and shadows, bouncing off sequined dresses and polished hair. Elvis stayed at the edge of the stage, gripping the mic stand, but not singing. His gaze tracked every movement, every flicker of light. His white jumpsuit blazed under the spotlights, catching the eyes of those who dared to glance up at him. He wasn't performing now. He was searching. "She's here tonight," Elvis repeated, his voice carrying to the furthest row. "We'll find her." The crowd responded with scattered shouts. A man in the balcony called out, pointing toward the front rows. A woman in the middle section stood and waved, but the ushers shook their heads and moved on. The tension thickened. The sensory details of the room sharpened under the strain. The warm velvet of the curtains, the sour temps of spilled gin on the carpet, the faint hum of amplifiers left idle. The usual electricity of a concert now felt like the quiet edge of a storm. Then, a disruption. In the third row, a woman in black raised a trembling hand. She didn't stand, only lifted her arm halfway, as if afraid to be wrong. The flashlight beam caught the shimmer of a ring on her finger, her pale skin stark against the darkness of her dress. A gasp rippled through those around her. Heads turned. Fingers pointed. "There, that's her," someone shouted, but Elvis didn't move yet. His eyes narrowed, studying her. He stepped down from the stage stairs, careful, deliberate. The crowd hushed to the sound of shifting chairs and muffled whispers. Security hesitated, unsure if this was truly the widow Elvis sought. A second woman stood 2 rows behind, also in dark clothing, clutching a small purse to her chest. Confusion spread. Was this the widow? Or was the wrong person about to step into the spotlight? The uncertainty grew louder. Fans whispered, "Is it her? Is he sure?" Others leaned into the aisle, straining for a better view. Elvis raised a hand again, not to the band this time, but to the ushers. "Give her the light." A narrow beam locked on the woman in black. Her face showed the traces of grief, rimmed red hands trembling in her lap. She nodded once, barely. Elvis stepped forward, but stopped short. He turned back to the crowd, his voice low yet carrying weight. "We need to be certain." The pause stretched. People shifted, restless. A tension between belief and doubt filled the room. Then, mid-chapter, Twistovus leaned into the mic. "She lost her husband not long ago. He loved this music. He loved nights like this." The crowd exhaled collectively, the confirmation tightening the emotional grip of the moment. Still, Elvis didn't climb down just yet. He let the moment hang, the open loop tugging at everyone in the room. If this was truly her, what would he do next? The woman lowered her head, tears sliding down her cheeks. Her hand shook harder, now pressing to her chest as if holding her heart in place. The spotlight stayed with her. Elvis turned from the mic stand, scarf sliding down as he stepped closer to the edge. The band stayed frozen. The audience leaned forward, eyes wide. For a brief moment, it seemed time itself slowed. The widow had been found. But what Elvis would do next, whether he would approach, speak, or even sing, remained unknown. And so the chapter closed, the tension unbroken, leaving every person in the showroom, every viewer hearing this story, locked on a single question. What would happen when Elvis finally stood face to face with her? Elvis stepped off the stage, lowering himself carefully into the crowd. The metal edge of the platform scraped faintly under his boots. Gasps shot through the audience as the king himself, still glowing in white rhinestones, descended into the rows of fans. Security moved quickly, parting the aisle, but Elvis waved them back. "It's all right," he said quietly, his southern drawl steady. "Let me." The woman in black sat frozen, her trembling hand halfway raised, eyes shimmering with tears. Elvis's steps slowed as he neared her. Every flashbulb from cameras lit the scene like lightning strikes, freezing each step in time. Then he reached out. His hand, still damp from the heat of the stage, extended toward hers. She hesitated, then placed her trembling fingers in his palm. The contact was electric, not of fame, but of recognition. A human connection made sacred by grief. She whispered her name, voice breaking. Witnesses recall it was almost inaudible, swallowed by the heavy silence of the room. Only Elvis heard. He nodded once, his eyes softening. "I know," he said gently. "I know. According to reports, she had lost her husband only months earlier. He'd been a soldier, a man who never missed an Elvis record, who once told her that if he didn't come home, she should see Elvis live for the both of them. That promise had carried her here tonight." Elvis knelt beside her chair. The white fabric of his jumpsuit brushed against the carpet, rhinestones catching and scattering the spotlight. The audience leaned forward, straining to hear, but the hush was so complete that even his soft words carried. "You're not alone," he told her. The phrase echoed like a prayer through the theater. The woman covered her mouth, shoulders trembling as tears fell. Around her, other women dabbed at their eyes. Men bowed their heads. Strangers held hands. For a moment, the 2,000-seat room shrank to two people, a widow and the most famous man in America. Bound by loss and compassion, Elvis lifted her hand to his lips. The gesture was slow, reverent. The audience collectively inhaled, as if holding the same breath. Flashbulbs popped again, catching the faintest glint of tears in Elvis's eyes. And then, mid-chapter twist, instead of returning to the stage, Elvis stayed kneeling. He spoke again, his voice quiet but firm. "I want to sing for you. Just you." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Fans gripped their seats. Some pressed their hands to their chests, already weeping. The band looked on nervously from the stage, instruments idle, waiting for any sign of what to do next. But Elvis didn't move yet. He lingered, still holding her hand, still grounded in that sacred space. The moment stretched longer, pressing on the room until even the sound of breathing seemed too loud. The widow finally nodded, a tiny movement, as if giving permission. Elvis squeezed her hand gently, then rose to his feet. As he stood, he turned back to the stage and raised his hand toward the band. The guitarist straightened, the pianist leaned forward, ready. But Elvis didn't rush. He kept his eyes locked on hers as he slowly made his way back to the microphone. The crowd sat silent, hearts pounding. What song would he choose? How could he put this into music? every ear strained for the first note, every eye locked on the king. And then he gave a subtle nod. The band hesitated, hands poised over strings and keys. Elvis tilted his head, the smallest smile flickering across his lips, signal only they could see. The room braced for something unforgettable. The band hesitated, eyes darting toward Elvis. He stood center stage again, though his gaze remained locked on the widow in the third row. One subtle nod from him, and the first soft notes of the piano slipped into the air. The melody was instantly recognizable, timeless. Wise men say only fools rush in. The audience erupted into hushed gasps. Couples clutched one another's hands. Strangers leaned closer together. It wasn't just another performance of Can't Help Falling in Love. Tonight, it was a vow sung to one woman. Elvis's voice was tender, stripped of its usual showmanship. Each word lingered, heavy with meaning. The amplifiers hummed softly behind him, their faint buzz mixing with the warmth of the strings. The widow's tears streamed freely now, glistening under the spotlight that followed her every move. She pressed the scarf he had given into her lap, holding it like a lifeline. From the back of the hall, witnesses later said goosebumps rose across the entire crowd. People described the sensation as if the whole theater were breathing in sync, hearts tethered to each lyric at the first chorus. Elvis's voice deepened, resonating through the velvet-draped room. Take my hand, take my whole life to... He extended his arm in her direction as if reaching once more for her trembling fingers. And then came the mid-chapter shift. Instead of turning back toward the full audience, Elvis angled his body, shoulders squared toward her alone. To everyone watching, it was as though 2,000 fans had disappeared, leaving only the widow in his world. The emotional wave swept through the hall. People sobbed openly. Couples embraced. Some clutched at their programs, pressing them to their faces as tears fell. The ushers, so often stoic, stood transfixed, flashlights dangling uselessly at their sides. At the bridge, Elvis slowed the tempo slightly, drawing out each phrase. His eyes glistened as he sang, voice cracking just enough to betray the raw emotion behind it. The widow covered her face with one hand, scarf in the other, shaking as if the song itself carried her grief away. Then came the gesture that sealed the moment forever. Elvis reached up, pulled the scarf from around his neck, the one now damp with sweat, the one that had rested against his chest all night, and gently tossed it to her lap. She clutched it instantly, her knuckles white. The gesture felt less like a gift from a performer, more like a sacred offering. The audience reacted in a ripple, an audible sob breaking the silence before applause swelled, not thunderous but reverent, like a congregation affirming a prayer. Elvis closed his eyes for the final refrain. His voice soared, "For I can't help falling in love with you." The last note lingered, reverberating against the high ceiling, then faded into silence. For 3 seconds, nobody moved. No one dared break the spell. Then the entire room rose in a standing ovation. Applause crashed like waves, hands clapping through tears, cheers cutting through sobs. Couples held each other tighter. Strangers hugged without hesitation. And yet, through the roar, Elvis's eyes stayed fixed on the widow. He leaned into the mic once more, speaking words that barely carried over the thunder of applause. "This one was for you." The widow bowed her head, scarf pressed to her chest. Witnesses recall she mouthed the words, "Thank you." But Elvis wasn't finished. He stepped back from the microphone, raised his hand once more. and silenced the band before they could strike the next note. The audience, already breathless, froze again. What Elvis did next would make sure this night never faded from memory. The final note of the song still echoed faintly when Elvis stepped away from the microphone. The applause thundered on, but his focus remained on the widow. He leaned down once more, speaking words that were not for the crowd, but for her. Witnesses recall him whispering, "Your husband is proud." Others say he promised, "You'll always have a seat in the front row." The exact words may differ depending on who retells the story, but the moment itself was unmistakable, private, and unforgettable. The widow nodded, clutching the scarf tight against her chest. Tears streamed down her face, and yet there was a small, fragile smile. For the first time in months, she wasn't carrying her grief alone. Elvis rose, turned back to the stage, and gave a small bow of his head. The band struck their next chord, but the audience was still stunned silent, caught between applause and reverence. Slowly, the clapping returned, wave after wave rolling through the showroom, until the sound became deafening. The widow sat back, trembling, her lap heavy with the scarf. Strangers around her touched her shoulder, squeezed her hand, or simply cried with her. The atmosphere had shifted. The concert was no longer just a performance, it had become a living testament to kindness. But the story didn't end that night. 3 days later, the widow received a package at her door. No one had warned her it was coming. The box was plain, the address handwritten. She carried it inside with shaking hands, setting it gently on the table before daring to open it. Inside was a guitar. Not just any guitar, but one she recognized from photos, a stage-played instrument, polished wood gleaming under the light. Tucked beneath the strings was a folded note, in Elvis's unmistakable handwriting. It read, "You'll always have a place in the front row." Elvis, her tears returned instantly. According to later interviews, she said the gift gave her strength she thought she had lost. She strummed it softly in her living room, each chord echoing like her husband's voice, returning for one more song. The widow's story spread quickly. Fans told and retold it, each detail painting Elvis not only as the king of rock and roll, but as a man whose heart beat as strongly as his music. Some say she attended his shows afterward, always seated in the front rows, always holding the scarf he had given her. Others believe the guitar remained her most treasured possession until her final days. Either way, the truth endures. One night in Las Vegas, Elvis Presley turned a concert into a moment of healing for a grieving widow, and into a memory that still brings tears decades later. The crowd that night never forgot it. People still recall how strangers embraced, how applause rang out like a chorus of gratitude, how even the ushers wiped their eyes with their sleeves. Elvis left the stage that evening with the same humility he had entered. But the widow left with something more, a reminder that even in loss, compassion could still reach her, and for everyone who witnessed it, the lesson was clear. Music may fill a room, but kindness can silence it. Stories like this remain part of Elvis's living legacy, proof that behind the legend was a man who saw pain in others and refused to ignore it. A scarf, a song, and a guitar became symbols not of fame, but of love, because kindness doesn't end when the music stops. It lingers, carried forward in every retelling, every memory, every tear. If this story touched you, share it with someone who still believes kindness can change a life. And tell me in the comments, what's one moment of compassion you'll never forget?